Hello and welcome back to Enquiry at Crescent Church in Belfast. It's really good to have you back with us this week if you were here last week. And if this is your first time, we want to make you especially welcome this week. We'd love to have you here physically, but unfortunately, given the circumstances, that isn't possible at the moment. This event is designed to give you, our listener, our audience, the opportunity to ask some of the big questions related to faith and Christianity, particularly issues maybe related to this global pandemic at the moment. We've been thinking particularly about those things. Here at Crescent Church, we're convinced that the message of Jesus Christ, the gospel as we call it, is deeply relevant for our world in 2021. And we're excited to talk a little bit tonight about why we think that. We're delighted to be joined once again this week by Dr. Paul Coulter. Paul's a medical doctor and a pastor, and he's therefore well equipped to be answering some of the questions we're going to be looking at tonight around this pandemic. Paul, you introduced yourself briefly last week. For those who maybe are just joining this week for the first time, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are?
Certainly, I live in Lisburn, which isn't too far from here, from Belfast, a little bit to the southwest. I might have said it last week, it is the leading city of Northern Ireland, for anybody who hasn't been around a lot. No, it is a city, but clearly very much in the shadow of Belfast. So I live there with my wife, Garling, who is Chinese Malaysian. She came to Belfast as a student to study medicine. I also went to study medicine and met her there. And we have two children who are 14 and almost 12. And as you said, Ollie, really after medicine, I moved into pastoral ministry, working with churches as a Bible teacher and helping people to grow in their Christian faith and come to Christian faith. And then from there, journeyed into the academic world with theology, did quite a bit of study and still do some teaching in that. But my main work now is really supporting church leaders, trying to encourage them and help them in the work that they're doing across the UK and Ireland.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. We're going to get straight into it tonight. We're going to address our first question. During the last 10 months of this pandemic, we've seen people display a strange mix of kindness and generosity, but simultaneously, we've seen kind of acts of selfishness. And to kind of highlight that, on the one hand, we've seen people like Captain Tom, who walked around his house 100 times, I believe it was. He raised over £30 million in the process. It was an amazing feat that really captured people's imagination. I personally have experienced kindness from neighbors, from friends, people dropping things around to the house. We had the clap for carers, all these sorts of things. There seemed to be a real kind of community spirit, a sense that we were all kind of battling against this, the same thing, and we should unite in that. And then simultaneously alongside that, and this is what I mean by the kind of selfishness idea. Early on, we saw that hoarding, things from the supermarkets, particularly toilet rolls seemed to be a big thing. People were hoarding, but for some reason, people had this mentality that we're all in this together, but also we're going to raid the shops and stack our kitchens or larders full of stuff. And that displayed a kind of a selfishness. Simultaneously, you have people who seem to think that the rules don't apply to them, and I know we're all guilty at points of breaking some of the rules, but some people seem to flout them entirely, seem to think that actually that they're above the law in that sense. And the question really boils down to this: why in tough times like we're experiencing at the moment are we as human beings both kind and selfish? Why both those things?
Yeah, I think it is a very relevant question, Ollie. I would add one other thing that just has been in my mind this week, that you've maybe read it again in the news about how globally we're sharing out the vaccines and so on, and whether we're doing that. So I think this works at lots of levels. It works at a kind of very local, individual, interpersonal level, and then it works at a societal level, and it even works at a global level, that we see this strange mixture of kindness and selfishness. And I do think the pandemic has kind of brought that to the fore to a great degree for us. And I'm going to suggest that really is an enigma about human nature. It's something about us that is a bit of a puzzle. Why is it? Because I think if we look at that throughout history even, we are clearly capable of some wonderful things. We can make wonderful works of art that are, that just take your breath away. We can produce beautiful buildings like the one we're sitting in. We can do such kind acts as well to others. And then on the flip side of that, we're capable of such destruction. And often in the process of making the beautiful things, we cause harm, or we use the same things to do great good and great harm. So I do think you're right to say there really is a bit of an enigma at the heart of who we are. But the other thing I would say in that is that the fact that we're having that conversation, and not just us, but people are having those conversations about fairness, kindness, compassion, goodness, looking out for the common good, thinking about the most vulnerable, applauding people who are doing what is good, and then at the same time tutting or shaking their head or complaining, getting angry about those who do what is bad, tells us also this enigma about ourselves, that we have this innate moral compass, if you like. We have this, we can't avoid that sense that there is a right and there is a wrong, there is a good and there is a bad. So that actual existence of moral judgment and of moral values intrigues me, as well as something that, because once you do that, there has to be a standard somewhere. Where does that standard come from? And I guess that's one of the reasons maybe that people don't always keep the rules, because they think, well, who made the rules and why should I obey that? What right did they have to make it? Do I just make my own rules? So there's a tension between being individualistic and a communal responsibility in all of these things that's very intriguing, and it probes, I think, to the heart of who we are as human beings.
Yeah, I think the word enigma is actually such a helpful word when it comes
Yeah.
to thinking about these things, because there does seem to be that tension within us. And just to kind of follow on from what you're saying, then, how does that enigma shape the way we understand ourselves? When we look at ourselves, how are we supposed to understand what's going on inside us?
Well, I've come to think of this in terms of two very simple words: beasts and gods, okay? And I don't think, in fact, I've discovered I am certainly not the first person to recognize this enigma. In fact, I'll quote one of those from quite some time ago in just a moment. But what I mean by that is that when we try to come up with explanations for what a human being is, I mean, what are you, Ollie, sitting there in all of your finery? What are you? What am I? When we try and answer that question, we always tend to veer in one of these two directions, either beasts or gods. So the beasts option, maybe, I say we always tend to, I think that option wasn't really a serious option for many people in the world until the 1900s, or 1800s, 1900s, that kind of right through the 19th century into the 20th century. Whenever, certainly in Europe, in the Western world, people began to really think, well, human reason has such great power that maybe we can figure everything out and solve every problem and have progress in the world and just move forward and build a better world. So it was like, well, okay, human reason is like that. And therefore God gets left out of the equation. We don't need God because we can solve the problems. But then we start to look at the natural world and at the animals around us, and we say, well, we're just another animal species, if you like. And then in the middle of the 1800s, you get on top of that a story of our origins. Charles Darwin obviously being the famous example of that says, we reckon we can explain where we all came from, and we basically are just animals. We're just beasts, highly evolved, yes, with some kind of peculiar qualities, but we're just beasts nonetheless. But the problem with that is that just doesn't seem to satisfy this moral compass within us. If we're just animals, why do we care about things like right and wrong and fair and unfair? Those don't really make sense if we're just meant to follow our instincts and just do, monkey does what monkey is, human does what human is. So it seems to me that doesn't satisfy us, and it doesn't explain us. And I think there's always therefore been a reaction. You can see this in the 1800s, that the whole, what they call the Romantic movement of poets and composers who went out and looked at nature and said, this is bigger than just, animals, and the way we feel about this is bigger than just our bodies and our instincts. This is something deeper and transcendent. And so they were inspired by that. Then you have philosophers, existentialists, and so on, who tried to say, well, we can make meaning in our experience, right up to the present day, where I would say the beasts idea is still there. And you hear it in pretty much every nature or science documentary. That's the kind of founding story that collectively as a society we've bought into. We came from nowhere with no ultimate purpose and no meaning. But at the same time, people don't live as if that was true. They look for meaning, they construct meaning, and that's the gods thing, that we can be effectively little mini gods. And I think that idea, people won't put it in those terms, but in our culture now in the West, that is increasingly the dominant idea, especially amongst younger generations, because basically what they're told is you can create yourself. You can, advance yourself. You can discover your true self, and you can develop your true self, and you can make the rules for yourself, and you can, you're free to do this. You're effectively a mini god. So we veer in these directions. And as I say, I said I would quote him, so I will do that. But this is not new to me. Blaise Pascal, who some listeners may know the name Pascal because it gave us the unit for pressure, kilopascals, and so on. So he was a great pioneering scientist in the 17th century, 1600s. But he was also a Christian believer, and he reflected a lot on human experience in a book called Pensées in French, or The Thoughts of Pascal. So here's what he said, translated into English. You'll be glad to hear. It is dangerous, he said, to make man see too clearly his equality with the brutes, that's what I've called the beasts, without showing him his greatness. It's also dangerous to make him see his greatness too clearly, apart from his vileness. It is still more dangerous to leave him in ignorance of both, but it is very advantageous to show him both. Man must not think that he is on a level either with the brutes or with the angels. In my case, I'll say the beasts, or with the gods, or with God. Nor must he be ignorant of both sides of his nature, but he must know both. And so this enigma, I think, is a clue to us that drives us to a very deep question of, well, how do I maximize that potential for good? How do I minimize the potential for harm? Because what I would say is we cannot just remove that from ourselves individually. So I could sit here and say, oh, I've been a good boy. I've kept the rules. Ollie, I know some people haven't, and let's shake our head at them. But if I do that, I'm denying my brutishness. I'm denying my potential for evil, not just my potential, but the wrong I actually do, which is real. And at the other side, I'm kind of demonizing those people. I'm saying they're the bad guys, whether it's the non-mask wearers or the terrorists or the abusers. Those are the bad guys. And we'll call that evil, and we'll say there are some evil people, but they're an aberration, they're abnormal, they're kind of a minority. I don't think that's honest with ourselves. I think all of us, you, me, everybody who's watching, has this struggle within ourselves. And until we wrestle with that and ask, what is that saying to us about who we really are, we haven't really got to the heart of what it is to be human.
That's really interesting. And so what it sounds like you're saying then is we are more than just beasts, but we're also less than gods.
Yeah.
And so the answer kind of seems to lie then somewhere in the middle. And I think as you sort of argued that point, you kind of gave some examples of why you thought that. Do you have any others to sort of evidence that?
If I say, there is, so let's take the idea that we're just beasts. Okay, last year, maybe some folks were here when we were over in the cafe, and it was easy to do that. In January last year here in the Crescent, we had an event like this, but with an audience physically there. And I give 3 examples that I think are relevant in this point, that we are certainly unique among the species on Earth. So I'm not going to say to you we are not like animals in some ways. There are clearly a lot of similarities. But there are some things that are absolutely unique about human beings that I think are telling us that we are more than just an animal. And so the 3 examples that I have found most helpful are the fact that we're the only species that blushes. What does that tell us? There is this shame that we feel or guilt that we feel. And when we're caught out, I've tried to fool you, but you really see what I'm really like, I blush. That doesn't make sense from an evolution point of view, because I should be able to hide that if I want to get advantage for myself. But it's telling me something about my desire for trusting relationship, and also a sense of moral code that I know somehow that it was wrong to deceive you, or that I fall short of some standard. Now, I might get the standard wrong and blush for the wrong reason, but it's telling me something unique about human beings. We're the only species that weeps with compassion. So we create tears when we see someone else suffering, even someone else that we've never met on the news. I mean, I watched a documentary. I don't know why. I mean, why do we want to watch a documentary about COVID at the moment? But I did. And it was showing you Italy when things were so hard at the beginning, and they got hit first in Europe, and coffins being lifted out on forklift trucks. And I didn't quite cry, but the tears could have formed very easily, because I was feeling the emotion that those families must feel. What does that tell me about our relational ability, and this compassion thing? And then we're the only species that faints when we're afraid, which again is a crazy thing to do, because you don't want to faint and literally lose consciousness when some beast is running after you. You want to be able to run away. But that tells us something about our fear of death. I think is the ultimate thing that's there. So we're strangely suited to living very successfully in the world, and then ill-adapted because these things affect us in a deeper way. And I think these are all signals that say we're not just animals. We're like animals. It's not that we're not at some level animals, but we're more. On the other side, are we gods? Well, what kind of God would be laid low by a virus? Can we really continue to believe? I guess we probed into this a bit last week as well, Ollie. Can we really believe that we can make our own destiny, discover ourselves, discover our true selves whenever we're so fragile? Is that all that there is? Is that the extent of it? Where does morality come from? Why do we judge ourselves? Why do we recognize not just I could say, well, Freud, for example, Sigmund Freud said morality is it's our one part of our consciousness punishing ourselves, and it's just an internal conflict. And I guess if you just focus on yourself, you could convince yourself of that. But once we start to relate to each other, that just doesn't cut the mustard. It doesn't work. So I could give myself all sorts of reasons why I would walk over and punch you in the nose now, and why that might be the right thing to do. You're not going to accept those reasons. You're going to say, this guy has no right to do that at all. It's just wrong. So we have this awareness that some things are just not right. And I think that's telling us that, you could say that's also another pointer that we're not just beasts, but it also tells us that we are less than the greatest thing that we could be. We're not these gods. We have needs, and ultimately, I think it's death that tells us that, which we've become more aware of in this pandemic, quite painfully sometimes. But what kind of God dies?
Yeah. No, really, really helpful, Paul. I guess then, if we're not beasts, which seems like a good thing, and if we're not gods, which we're clearly not, as you say, then what is the alternative?
Yeah, and I mean, I know you said earlier, Ollie, I think you're right to say we're more than beasts and we're less than gods, but I'll sort of flip that around a little bit and say I think when we think like in either of those ways, we set our sights too low in a way. And the reason I say that is that, if we lessen ourselves to be beasts, we're not realizing the fullness of what we are as human beings. If we think we are gods, then we've got a pretty pathetic view of what a god is, of what the greatest thing, and so in a sense there is a higher. I think these things are ways to try and answer the enigma under the sun. I'll use a phrase that's a phrase that comes from the Bible, from a book called Ecclesiastes, and the writer of that book is kind of reflecting on how life works, and he talks about a lot of the things that we might talk about in response to a pandemic, but he has this constant idea that this is the way life works under the sun. But what if there was something above the sun? I don't mean physically. I mean, I'm not saying God is out there beyond our solar system physically, but what if there was a reality that is higher? So when we think of ourselves like beasts, we've effectively got what I would call, some people might call, a biocentric view of what we are as humans. We think of life and the diversity of life on the planet, and we're just one part of it. And that has some truth. It's not wrong. It has a lot of truth. We need to learn to live better as part of an ecosystem we've harmed through our actions. On the flip side, when we think that we are gods, we've got an anthropocentric view, we've got a human-centered view. And that leads us to kind of just use the world for our advantage and be selfish. So beasts are kind of, well, we'll just go with the flow and lessen ourselves. But actually, what if our view was theocentric? What if we could know God, the true God? And what if that's the only way to actually understand what a human being is to put not us at the center, but God at the center? So I think what our culture is increasingly doing is putting human beings at the center, but then with this tension that when it comes to the environment, we want to kind of play our part and just be, because we don't actually know how to resolve these two things. But I think once we have God, our creator, at the center, and understand who he made us to be, and understand then from him what life is really all about, then we realize, yes, we're more than beasts, but we're not God. So yeah, that's the only answer really I can give, and I'm happy to sort of talk more about that.
No, I think that's really, really helpful. I guess the question that I have kind of off the back of that is what does that mean then for for our lives? Like practically, what is the impact of that? Because if we're not beasts and we're not gods, like how does that shape the way I live this week? How does that shape the way I think about myself, if you see what I mean?
Yes, yeah. And I would say that's actually the path to true human dignity. So you might kind of think ironically, if I think I'm the greatest thing, then that's dignity because I've got this greatest value and honor. But it isn't. And the reason it isn't is because you will sooner or later reach the end of your capacity. If you think that you are the measure of what is good and valuable and great, with no reference point beyond yourself, nothing outside yourself to measure that by, then you don't really, you only have as much value as you can sustain with the strength that you have. So when a problem hits, you're suddenly left with nothing. You're not the person that you dreamt of being. Your dream is shattered. But true human dignity, I would say, as a Christian, comes from understanding that we are created by God for a purpose. We're created by him in his image, to use the biblical phrase. And we are loved by God, and that's what gives us value. That value isn't dependent on what I do. So when you go into life knowing that, my value is not something that I have to create and build up or that I have to convince other people of, so I'm not trying to, and then we live in this shame culture where it's like, okay, if I don't meet your standards, you'll unfriend me on Facebook, you cruel person. And
I'll never do that.
No, I don't know if we even are friends. We probably are we? I'm not on it often enough. But the point, you know what I mean? Those things really hurt because it's like saying, I don't want to know you, I don't want you in my life. But when I can turn away from that and say, I'm not going to live either just for other people's approval or even to try and convince myself of my value, because I receive my value because of who God has made me to be, and I can give myself away. In that sense, I can actually serve others. And I think that's the only path to really resolving this. I can learn from God how to put those things that are wrong with me right, the wrong, the evil that is in me. And that's not just about stopping doing it. It's also about dealing with the guilt of what I have done. Because how do I deal with that if there's no one to forgive me? But the way that we operate, because we want forgiveness, we want to be cleansed from it, we want to be cleaned from the things that we're ashamed of in our past. And then we want to have confidence to go out and live a better life. That only really, I think, works if someone can wash us clean, if someone can declare us right and say, okay, you're forgiven for the wrong, and now I'm going to teach you not me figure out what is right and what is wrong, not me figure out what suits me or even what suits us, but actually learning that from the one who designed us, who made us.
Brilliant. No, I think that leads us on potentially then to our second
Yeah.
question, which focuses in a little more on the theme of identity. And I think this pandemic has caused us to stop, maybe for the first time in a long time, and actually think about our lives. I think many people have actually been like, wow, I don't have to rush about, commuting back and forth to work. I don't have to be running here, there, and everywhere. I actually have time now to think about where I'm going in life. What's it all about? What is my direction in life? And in some ways, that's a little bit scary because often we numb ourselves to that by just busyness. So I think the pandemic always put the brakes on. And actually, it maybe even forced us to think about, what are the things that I really live for? What are the things that I want to achieve over the next 5-10 years? Who really am I in this crazy world? And I think the question then that we're going to ask kind of is connected to that. So in this confusion, who is the authentic me? How can we know who we really are?
I suppose I'm going to suggest to you, Ollie, that our culture in the West is embarking or has embarked on a huge experiment about that question in which we are the subjects. I don't mean this is not a conspiracy theory moment. There's enough of that out there, and I'm not into that. But I think what I'm saying by that is that there is a project that is going on in our culture, which I think 3 A's capture that, 3 A words: autonomy, authenticity, and actualization. Okay, these are not my words, but they are. Let me explain what I mean by that. That what we are increasingly saying, and certainly in education theory, in parenting theory, in social theory, these things are very, very live, that there is an authentic you, there is an authentic me. And you need to discover the authentic you. I need to discover the authentic me. And therefore, the greatest value is to be true to yourself. Follow your dream. Figure out what your dream is. Figure out who you are and follow it. And that process of following it is called self-actualization. That's the other second A, that you're pursuing this actualizing your potential. So the thing you must do in life is to maximize and fulfill your potential. And to do that, you need the third A, autonomy, that you have the right to choose for yourself. Nobody else can tell you. Nobody else should tell you who the real you is. That's an imposition. That's somebody dictating to you, restricting your freedom, holding you back from being all that you could be. So the only person who can figure it out is you. Now, I happen to think that that is a huge pressure on people. And I'm going to say that I've said this is a big social experiment because these values are very, very live. But it's an experiment because we haven't lived that way before. That's not how people have lived historically, either in the West or in other parts of the world. That hugely hyper-individualistic view that is all about you and yourself. And so it's a bit of an experiment, and it's too early yet to say what the consequences will be, what the outcome will be. Although what I would say is that the early signs are not positive. I mean, we are seeing real issues with the increasing burden of mental health problems, the reduction in resilience, even in the face. And I hope it doesn't sound hard when I say this, but what I'm hearing a lot at the moment is that it's almost as if this is the worst of times that we're going through. But there have been worse things in the past, and there may well be worse things to come in your lifetime and mine, for us as a society, and even for you or for me individually. And what it seems is that this project of trying to build yourself doesn't lead to a very resilient self, or a very, I guess you can only be as deep. The world, in a sense, can only be as deep as you are. It can only be as strong as you are. It can only be as enduring as you are. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I am particularly, if that was all there is, I'm really not that deep, I'm really not that strong, and I'm really not that enduring. I'm going to die someday. You know, my emotions go from here to there overnight. Simple little things can knock me right down. So when I try to build up my self-esteem, it's like I'm building up this house of cards and somebody just has to say the wrong word and it's down. I mean, if that's where I'm looking for stability and security and strength, I don't trust myself for that. And I don't think anybody should. I don't think it's strong enough to carry that weight. I don't think you are. I don't think I am. I don't think any of us are. And I don't mean to insult anybody when I say that. It's just, I think we've got to be more honest with ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that understanding of identity certainly resonates with what I see on social media.
Right.
The way people talk about sort of finding contentment, it's very much, you know, look for it within yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
In effect, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating that you don't think that is a helpful approach.
Yeah.
I guess then the question is, if we aren't capable of uncovering our own identity, where then do we look for it, or how do we find it?
Yeah, well, I suppose, I mean, I mentioned that this is an experiment because it's never really been done before. As I understand it, and I'm not claiming to know every culture and every moment in history, but I don't see that in the history books. But I suppose you could say then, well, where have people tended to look for identity, for purpose, for these bigger, more substantive, weightier things? And I think clearly people have looked to family for that historically, family values, finding stability within a family. And if you've had a good family, that can be a really good thing. But we all know that families aren't enduring forever either. You know, even if we lean on other people, yes, they can help us, but they won't be with us forever. And of course, there are also bad and dysfunctional families. So I don't know that that's the ultimate answer, but I think it's a better answer than the just on myself. You could say, well, we'll kind of rest on society. And that's back to this big debate about, you know, how do we live together as a society that the pandemic has brought back to us. But that seems to get messed up by the fact that, you know, we can have all the best intentions. Let's share the wealth equally. Let's give everybody an equal, you know, opportunity. But somehow, as human beings, we just kind of want a bit more for me than for you, and maybe a lot more for me than for you. And so we end up with inequalities, and some people on the wrong side. There are some people who are favored by society who can work the system and do well, and others who end up on the wrong side, either through their own choices or just because of where they happen to be born. We could say, well, what about religion? And that's a very sort of hot topic in a sense in our culture today as well, because I think the general idea in that 3A project, that autonomy, authenticity, actualization project, the dominant idea is that religion is the bad guy because all it does is constrict your autonomy and tell you, you know, judge you for parts of who you are. And I probably have a fair bit of sympathy with that when I try to look fairly as a person who is a Christian and professes to be. I look at what organized Christianity has done, and I would say it hasn't always reflected what I think Christianity is or should be. And certainly sometimes it has fallen very far short of that when there have been abuse scandals and mistreatment of people. So I have a certain sympathy with saying, let's reject that kind of organized religion, because it seems that it didn't always listen well to people or understand people who didn't find it easy to fit in or were on the downside of society. But at the same time, because we've stripped all of those things away, it's like, don't look to your family, don't look to society, don't look to religion. All it leaves us with is ourselves. And that's the scary thing. I really do think that's scary, because apart from anything else, it's only going to advantage the stronger people, isn't it? They're going to do better in that than the weak ones. And I don't think that's going to end up with this wonderful society that you might think it will. If we all have freedom to just maximize who we are, we'll all do well. I'm not so sure. So yeah, these things aren't enough, I guess.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've noticed amongst kind of the younger generations, being a youth worker myself, and just kind of observing, I guess, some of the behaviors and desires of the younger generations, is that there seems to be a longing for, and I think you use the term authenticity.
Yes.
There
Yeah.
seems to be a desire that, that people kind of like are drawn to influencers, for example, who seem to
Yes.
be
Yeah.
authentic. They seem to be showing
Yeah.
all the parts of their lives that aren't necessarily curated, even
Yeah.
though the bits that are supposedly authentic are probably curated as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There seems to be some kind of longing for authenticity,
Yes.
is what I'm saying, and I think like maybe that is one of the reasons why younger people are rejecting so-called
Yeah.
organized
Yeah.
religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see that authenticity as being important, and if so, where should we be looking for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a good thing, and often in these things there is a very good thing because hypocrisy ought to make us wrinkle our noses and kind of feel a bit of disgust, and there has been too much hypocrisy. I mean, I'm going to put my hands up and say I can't say that I am always authentic, but in that sense of true, even to what I believe, never mind what I think I should be. So but I hope I'm not hypocritical in the sense that I'm hiding some deep secret. I'm not, but I can understand people want to see something that's real, that's genuine, that isn't curated. I do think you're on to something though when you say the influencers and so on. I wouldn't be so sure that it really is authentic, because once you're in that world of wanting likes and followers and so on, and then especially when you get a bit of sponsorship from advertisers, those things, we can tell ourselves, oh, but I'll stay true and honest. But we so easily get led along and we present effectively what people want to see. So I think we know that reality TV, even the YouTube people, bloggers, all of these people, it self-selects people who are able to present themselves in a way that is a little bit out there and edgy and interesting and different and quirky. And how much is that the real them, or is that something that they then learn to major on because it gains more of a following? So I think we should have a healthy suspicion of that. And I think therefore the authenticity that we're really looking for is authentic commitment and love in what I would say is the true sense of love, which is someone who will seek your good relentlessly. As they understand it and will be true with you. In other words, that means true enough to tell you the bits about you that actually aren't good, to kind of guide you towards where you might need to change and develop, not just to accept you unconditionally. I think to accept you unconditionally in the sense of I'll be for you and I'll be with you, but I'm not going to be blind to the problems that you have. And I don't want you to be blind to my problems, because what I want for you and what I hope you want for me is that we can actually grow together and learn from each other. That kind of depth of committed. So there's an absolute cast iron commitment that is not dependent on liking you and liking everything about you, right? So you don't have to hide anything, but that is actually also not going to leave you there. I don't think the social media world has got that yet, because it seems to be there's a lot of trolling and unfriending and shaming that goes on. So therefore, how can people ever be completely authentic? Because they can be authentic as long as they're saying what the majority approves of or their friends approve of. And of course, then they get into an echo chamber, a bubble that they don't even hear the alternative view. They don't even consider it. They're not encouraged to. I want something more authentic than that. I don't want to just meet people who are like me. I want to learn from people who aren't. But I also want to know that there's someone who knows more than I do, who can actually help me, because I know I don't know everything. So where can we find ultimate true authenticity? I guess I would say, it's going to sound like a very trite answer because I'm a Christian, of course, I'm going to say Jesus. I think we should take a really good look at him, because I think if we want to see a truly authentic human life, I think we'll find it in him. I believe that. I don't think there is any character on the pages of any book, any character in history, because he's not just a story, he's a historical figure. Challenge us about in his authenticity, his consistency, his radical commitment to the good of people, his constant willingness to both love them and yes, accept them as they are, which is a good thing as far as saying, okay, so I'm going to be with, but actually then to teach them and guide them and to show them. And there's no flaw in that ever comes up in the pages of the Bible. It's not, you can't find anyone who can say, actually, here's what that guy was inauthentic or false or untrue to what he said he believed. He's constantly, completely truthful. And in fact, it's from him. I mean, I said that I'm actually angry. I didn't say I'm angry, but I do get angry when in the name of Christianity, I see things that are done that are not worthy of Jesus. And it's because I'm looking at Jesus that I'm able to say that. So I do think we can look at the history of the church and say that was just wrong. They should not have done that. They had no right to do it. It was wrong. But I know why I would say that, because I'm comparing it with Jesus. But I would love to sort of say, well, other people look and see that it's wrong, but how do they know it's wrong? They know it because of this moral compass. But actually, where is the right standard where there's no flaw? I think then they're going to have to look at Jesus. So the church might not match that. I think we should. I think we can learn to do it more. But once we look at him, we can't sort of say, oh, that's hypocrisy. Whatever you can say about Jesus, he certainly wasn't a hypocrite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, certainly, there's so many examples where you see a disconnect between the church and Jesus as well. And I think actually when I've had people maybe speak to me about the hypocrisy of the church, I think it's so vital to look at Jesus and see what he was like, and then set that against what people are doing in the name of.
And I don't think, that's not me saying that, but are you, Ollie? You'll know the passage as well where Jesus actually said, he went as far as to say that when it comes to people who do things in his name but don't follow his teaching, which is, for example, love your enemy and love your neighbor, and be righteous, be like your Father in heaven. He says, I'm going to say to those people, I never knew you. Now, I'm not therefore saying that every Christian who was ever a little bit unlike Jesus, they're not a true Christian. Please don't mishear that, because I'm not exactly like Jesus. But what he is talking about there is people who have done things in his name that are actually the opposite of what he actually wants us to do, that they didn't even know him at that very basic level. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that some people will take that name of being a Christian and doing things in that name. But at the same time, I'm not trying to diss the church, because I think actually for me as a Christian, it's incredibly important. It's in the church that I meet people who aren't like me. And there are times when that irritates me, and I need to sit down and realize, what is that about me and about them? And then we come together to the Bible, we come together to Jesus, and we say, well, look, I'm not like him, you're not like him in this, so how do we grow to be like him? I haven't found a different way to do that other than sharing real community with other Christians. And so I think the church has a vital role to play in helping us know Jesus and in sharing Jesus, the message of Jesus, with others and helping others. And it does an awful lot of that. So there's an awful lot that's good, but there is also some hypocrisy, and we should name that when we see it.
I think that's really helpful, and I think that's a good challenge to the idea that you can sort of live as a Christian. You can have this relationship with Jesus that's completely really good challenge to that. So then I guess the question, probably just finally before we take a short break. So we've kind of discussed the fact that we have this struggle to determine our own identity, and we've then looked at how Jesus is kind of the ultimate example of what an authentic human being looks like. So how does that understanding of who Jesus is help us understand ourselves?
So, Jesus, it's a very interesting thing, and I would encourage anybody to read the Gospels in the Bible that tell us about this. I know last week you mentioned, Ollie, there's a course coming up in the Crescent, or online, I think, that the Crescent is running, called Christianity Explored, that actually helps people to do that. You just read through one of the books of the Bible and talk about that and learn about it together, which is about Jesus. So that's a great way to do it. But what Jesus... I'm not going to call it the secret of his authenticity. It wasn't hidden. It was right up there. Was the reason he was authentic was because he was always living under God, under his Father. we believe Jesus was God, but the Father and the Son and the Spirit we talk about. And so here is the Son of God living as a human being, but always relating to his Father, always doing what his Father wanted, always aware of and completely open to the Father. That was the heart of it. But the amazing thing is that Jesus actually teaches us that we can know God as Father. We can live that same way. We can't become God. Jesus is God, God is God, but it's that God needed to become one of us to show us what it really looks like to be human. Because we're always veering off into either making ourselves beasts and living like we're just beasts, or we're veering off towards making ourselves gods. So let me kind of recount just really quickly the kind of story, because Jesus was living in a story that was much older than him. He was fulfilling Old Testament prophecies. He was fulfilling a story that goes right back to the beginning of humankind that the Bible tells us. And that story begins, the story of humankind in the Bible begins with creation by God as people who, as a creature that uniquely is called, is created in the image of God, to be like God in a way that no other creature can, to know God in a way that no other creature can, and to do God's will, to make God known to the other creatures, if you like, to look after them the way God does. So it's a picture of harmony with human beings knowing our place, that we're not God, but we have a special role in looking after and developing the world. That then goes wrong because what the basic lie that led to human sin is that if you don't need God, you can have the knowledge of both good and evil, okay? Take the fruit of the tree, this tree of the knowledge of good and evil that we read about in the book of Genesis. They take the fruit and they eat it because they think we can determine what is good and what is bad. That's effectively, let's make ourselves gods. We will take God's place. We don't need to live under God. We're good enough to do it without him. And that set us on this journey of, I think, self-destruction, quite honestly, Ollie. But God didn't let us go endlessly on that journey. So he put into our experience of the world things that would point us back to him, challenges that would make us stop, including the ultimate challenge, which is death, that would make us stop and realize, actually, this is not right, and we need to get back. We need to somehow put this right. Except that we can't put it right ourselves. So when we try to, we're just trying to be God again. Do you see what I mean? So we're trying to solve the problem. But Jesus is not the only point at which God speaks. God speaks through history to human beings. He makes himself known to them. He's calling them to come back. And sometimes people do, and they trust in God. But even those people have deep flaws when we read about them in the Bible. Ultimately, though, God then speaks to us in a unique way, not just in words, but in a person who is the perfect, authentic human being. The one who is so authentic, as I say, when you read about him and you look at him and you think, okay, I thought I was doing okay. I'm really not. I've got so much more to learn about life. The things that he says, I'm not even sure that on a good day I could be like that. I could live up to that standard. How am I going to do it? So I realize both my deficiency, but I also realize my dignity, because if God can become a human being, then human beings must be really special. And if it's actually possible to live this way, then I can be so much more. But how do I do that? Well, I need forgiveness and cleaned up. And then I need a new power to live. And so Jesus came not just to show us how to live, but really importantly, he came to die, to take our place in death, to die for our deficiency, our sin, and our rebellion against God, so that we could be forgiven, so that we could be cleaned up, so that we can become part of a new human race. That's actually the way the Bible describes it. It's like, whoa, a new kind of human being. Human beings Mark II or Mark Infinite, whatever, because what God now wants to do in you and in me is to make you like Jesus and to make me like Jesus. That's the real authenticity project. And it's not about autonomy, because autonomy says I'll do it on my own. It's about learning from God. It's about the lordship of Jesus, about saying, the only way I'm going to do this is by, first of all, admitting that I can't do it on my own. I'm a sinner, receiving God's forgiveness, and then coming into this relationship with God as Father, where I learn, and I'm still learning, big L plates on my chest, but actually I'm learning to trust in God. I'm learning to obey God. I'm learning to see the world with Jesus and God at the center, not me. Although I keep on putting myself back and then having to push that out, but I'm learning that. And that is changing everything. And part of that is living together with other Christians. And part of it is going out to help other people know about Jesus, because that's the greatest thing I can give them, and to show love to them the way Jesus commands me to. So therefore, that's the authentic response, if you like, that I go out, not to do it about for me, but to do it for him and for the good of others. So in a sense, I can get over myself and actually live for something bigger than me.
Brilliant.
Which is not just bigger than me, but actually true and real, and that's Jesus.
No, I think that's such an exciting vision. It's something that...
Well, I'm learning it, trust me, Ollie, but that's okay. I mean, I will learn it for the rest of my life, God willing. But I just want to say to others, I mean, that's the journey, but it begins with recognizing I need Jesus.
Yeah.
I can't do this on my own, and that's okay, because that's what makes me then look to him for forgiveness and to lead me from now on in my life.
Yeah, and it's so far from limiting or restrictive. It's being part of something.
Well, it's something so much bigger, but there are limitations that come with it. I don't get to do everything my own way, but that's a good thing, because I don't actually know what is best.
Yep.
And it's not, so it's not a diminished life.
No.
Jesus described it as life in all its fullness. It's a life of knowing God. And I mentioned earlier about security, because I think maybe I didn't actually say it when I say that the early signs of what this autonomy, authenticity, actualization project is leading to is a deep insecurity and a deep loneliness. So I know that people want to have friends and community and so on, but actually there are so many lonely people. But where do you find someone who you can absolutely trust and depend on? That ultimately, that's only in God and in Jesus, and then from people who are learning from him how to love you and how to be loved by you. And that's the church as it should be.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paul. We are now going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you for all the questions you've submitted. Please continue to do that over the next 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and address some of them together. We also just want to remind you of the email address that you can send an email through to if you'd like to follow up on any of the discussions we've had over the past few weeks. If you'd like to actually speak to someone, a member of Crescent Church, about some of these things, even just one-to-one, we'd love to do that. We'd love to connect with you in that way. So please do email reception@crescentchurch.org if you'd like to speak to someone. We also have a course that Paul mentioned. We have a course coming up called Christianity Explored, and that's an amazing opportunity to dig a bit deeper into the life of Jesus. So if you're interested in that, please send an email to the same address and just express your interest, and we'd love to give you more details about that. At the moment, we're thinking it'll probably happen on Zoom towards the end of February, but that's such a good opportunity to look at someone who lived the ultimate life of authenticity. So please do consider that. But let's have a break for just a few moments, and then we'll come back for about 10 minutes or so of questions. Welcome back. Thank you for all the excellent questions you've submitted. We're just going to run through them, and Paul's going to have a crack at answering them for us. Thank you, Paul, for being willing. So question number 1, a science question. Should the coronavirus be described as a life form?
Sounds like Trivial Pursuit, doesn't it? It's a science category.
I feel like Jeremy Clarkson on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Which level am I at now? Is this the 1,000? Is a virus a life form? That last week, actually, you mentioned a phrase that I found helpful that is used by some virologists, any way of calling them on the edge of life. So they are, I think they're more than non-living, but they're not quite they don't quite fulfill all the categories, or all the criteria we would say of a life form, the way a bacteria might. And the main reason for that is that they can't reproduce themselves without using the mechanisms inside the cells of another living organism, whether that's you. That's how the virus multiplies. It has to use your cells and the machinery that's inside your cells to actually copy itself. It doesn't have that machinery for itself. So I think it would be a bit simplistic to say they're not at all alive. It's also a bit confusing to say they're fully alive.
Okay.
They're somewhere in this vague in between, which is quite interesting. But then I did say last week that some virologists are saying we only know now about viruses what we knew 100 years ago about bacteria. We have a lot more to learn.
Wow.
And I certainly don't claim to be an expert at all about it. But I found that quite fascinating about how much there is still to discover out there in this big world of ours.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of funding going into that over the next few years.
Probably. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. So question number 2. How do I ensure that I'm not deciding my identity as a result of contagion, under the influence of social trends, whether that be under the influence of the 3 A's or religious teaching, i.e. avoid being a mere product of my environment? Can this be avoided?
Can it be avoided? Not entirely, I think. I mean, I think it would be a bit crazy of me to sit here and say to you, I'm somebody who's not at all shaped by my environment. And it's not a bad thing to be shaped by our environment. It's not bad to recognize what's going on. And I think what is bad is just to unquestioningly follow that without actually reflecting. And I think that's true whether it's a religious idea or what we wouldn't say is a religious idea, although when you listen to this 3 A's thing, it almost sounds like a new religion, certainly a philosophy. And it's the people who preach it just as strongly as any Christian preacher might do. So I think we are equally in danger of just following that, whether it's this predominant story around us or whether it's religious belief. So what I would want to encourage anybody to do is to step back and actually weigh that up and evaluate it. And so I don't think we can ever escape our environment. I don't think we should even want to do that. But it's not just a question of what influences us. I think we are shaped by our commitments and what we are loyal to. So the authenticity that I'm interested in is not just who am I on my own, but it's actually what is the commitment? What is it I see as a greater good, a greater thing? And for me, that's not a what, that's a person, that's Jesus. And the wonderful thing about that is that when I encounter him, I'm not encountering someone who's from my environment at all. I mean, Jesus didn't live in Ireland, Northern Ireland. He lived in a very different part of the world at a very different time. Yeah, he certainly didn't live in Lisburn. And he, so he lived in a very different place and time with all sorts of different things going around, but he didn't fit into that place and time perfectly. And he doesn't fit perfectly into mine. So I think what he's calling us to is a way of living and being that is counter-cultural in every culture. And when the church or Christianity or when it settles down and just follows the culture, which I think you could say that's one of the reasons it became hypocritical, then it's somehow becoming less like Jesus in a way. The more we look at him and ask, I'm not living there, but what would it mean to live the way Jesus did in Lisburn, here in my place and context, in the things that I've been given to do, in the relationships that I have. And I think that takes some thinking and reflection, but it's not impossible. It's not a foreign thing, because what you find is that the things that he taught and the example that he showed us almost transcends. It's greater than any one context. So yes, we're products of our environment, but that you can't just say, well, I'm a Christian because I grew up around Christians. My wife grew up as a Buddhist and became a Christian. And there are lots of people who've done that. And even if I were just following Christianity because my parents taught me it, I don't actually think that would be authentic Christianity. It's got to be something that I have made a commitment to, or someone that I have. I've said my loyalty is now not to me, not to the opinion of the crowd, not to anyone else other than to Jesus. And that could sound very revolutionary and scary, but actually, when we do that, we learn from him how to be a whole lot better as a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a parent, a citizen even of the country. I think that makes for very good citizens and good family people and good friends. But it's ironically, it's only when I put Jesus first that I can really learn that.
Amazing. No, that's that's a really helpful answer. A lot of food for thought there. Let's move on to question 3. What advice would you give to a Christian who struggles to feel or know their identity in Christ? And then they ask, why is it so difficult to maintain and live out experientially?
Yeah, and I think that is not a surprise to us when we read the Bible. So I don't want to paint a picture that says, you become a Christian and then suddenly it's just plain sailing and it's easy. And the reasons for that, I think, are very clear in the Bible. There are, and Christians have recognized this for a long time, there are 3. One is the fact that whilst God is at work in our life, there is also an enemy of God, Satan, and he wants to destroy that work of God to lead us in a different direction, the same way that he was the one, suggested it to our first parents to go and eat that fruit and become like God. And he's always suggesting that to me and to you as well. And then there's the fact that I live in the world that I live in, and I'm surrounded. And I think actually it's very subtle the way I'm surrounded by this AAA message, if you like, but it's everywhere. It's certainly very, very dominant, I think, in many of the shows that we binge watch or that we kind of see, whether those are reality shows or films or the dramas that are played out in Netflix or in Amazon or BBC. It doesn't matter which platform. So, yeah, and it's there on the billboards, it's there in the conversation. So there's a pressure that comes from that. And then the third thing is what Christians call the flesh, which is really the old me. So it's almost as if there are now 2 me's. There's the old me that is quite happy with this AAA project because it sounds like, a really good deal, doesn't it? I get to be my own boss and I get to lead the way. And so that is tempting and it's attractive. But on the other side, there's this new me that is becoming like Jesus. And that creates an inner tension. It's one of the reasons why sometimes being a Christian leads to new challenges, because you realize there's parts of what I thought was the authentic me that actually Jesus and the Bible are telling me isn't really good for me. And so I'm going to have to, and it's not honoring to God, I'm going to have to stop that and give that up. That's a sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice it's more like this. Well, it's not really, when you realize what those things are, it's not so much like a sacrifice. It's not like I'm cutting off my left arm. It's like I'm cutting out a tumor that's killing me. It's painful, but it's good. The result of it is good. And so that is the reality of the Christian life. So I think, yes, it is hard, but it's possible. It's possible when we choose to say, okay, rather than listening to my flesh that leads me this way, I'm going to listen to the Spirit of God who's going to lead me this way. Rather than listening to the opinions of the world, I'm going to listen to other Christians and learn from them and encourage them and let them encourage me. And so we need each other in that journey. We support each other and encourage each other. And then rather than kind of listening to the messages of the culture, if you like, then I'm gonna listen to the Word of God, and I'm gonna take some real time. So I think the reason we find it harder is because honestly, we invest most of our time in listening to the other things, and not enough of it in listening to the truth of God's Word. And that's not to blame anybody for it, but it's to say that let's dedicate ourselves to doing that. As Christians and help each other along the way and be patient with each other and realize we're not the finished product. And so we've got to be ready to forgive one another and tolerate one another when we're not the finished product, but never give up on helping each other towards that.
Brilliant. Really helpful and really challenging. Question 4, does the aim to be seen to be popular amongst a peer group conflict with our authentic self? So let me just repeat that. Does the aim to be seen to be popular amongst a peer group conflict with our authentic self?
Yeah, I suppose there are 2 ways I could read that question, Ollie. And one is, does it conflict with the idea of finding my authentic self? And I think, yes, that is one of the basic tensions. We can tell ourselves we're trying to be authentic, but actually what we end up doing is trying to be the person that people will like.
Sure.
There's a very deep thing in most of us of wanting to be liked. Some of us are freer from it, and that leads to its own problems as well. We're quite happy not to be liked, and then we don't ever try and do things that other people might like, and so we struggle with these things. But that's one way to read the question. The other one is, I suppose, is popularity stopping me actually becoming what I really authentically could be, in the way that I've described it, of becoming like Jesus? And I think yes. I think we all have to, the idea that the majority is right, and therefore I should try and be in with the majority, is a really dangerous thing. That's led to some really bad places in history. I mean, it's not just in totalitarian states where it's all controlled centrally that people make bad decisions. That can happen in democracies. I'm not going to give recent examples because people might have different opinions about who gets elected and whatever, but I certainly know in the 1930s in Germany, it led to a very bad result. A party and a person was elected who was really evil and did a great deal of wrong in Nazi Germany. So we know that the majority isn't always right, but having the confidence to say, actually, I'm not interested in popularity or popular opinion, but I really want to know what is true, what is real authenticity. And so I'm not going to settle for just what will make me popular, what will fit in with the crowd. And I think for people to do that, it's hard. It's one of the things that can stop people investigating Christianity or even coming to Christ. But I want to say, don't let it stop you, because you'll find that you've got a lot of people who will support you, Christians who will encourage you. But more importantly, what Jesus said was, if you want to follow me, you've got to deny yourself, take up your cross, be ready to die, and follow me. And he was crystal clear about that. This is not going to be popular. You're going to end up maybe like me, being crucified, not literally, but on the outside. But what he promises is that if you lose your life for his sake, you really find true life, and a life that endures forever, and that he will welcome us into the eternal home that he came to create for us, which I didn't mention earlier, I mentioned last week, but that real hope of a world that is put right by God. So yes, there's pain, there's suffering in that, but the message of the Bible, it seems to me, is always that you suffer now, and that's something that happens whether you follow Jesus or not. That's just life. But there is glory to come. There's something better in the world to come. And if we therefore think that it's just all about the equation of what I get in this life, we're never going to really understand it. When we realize it's actually about the life to come as well, the lasting eternal life, that really changes the equation. So it's worth what we lose now because of what is gained.
Definitely. No, that's so helpful. That's really useful. And I think just reflecting on what you said there, the idea that you would become a Christian to become popular is quite laughable, really.
Well, maybe there was a time when that was the way, and maybe in a place like Northern Ireland where it was cool to be Christian, or it led to advantages. I think that is largely changed, and I don't think that's a bad thing. That's in many ways back to what Jesus said it would be like, and where that led to sometimes was a kind of a comfortable or nominal Christianity. It's like tick a box to say you're a Christian, but that's not the kind of Christianity Jesus talked about. It's not real, authentic Christian identity. So I think we're in a place now where people are less likely to decide it for that reason. But they still need to weigh up and say, actually, if this is about what is true and what is real, then it's better to have what is true than to live in a lie that might be more convenient now, and then get stripped away and you realize it's worth nothing in the end.
Absolutely. Really good. So we'll move on to our final question of the night. It is clear that each of us have an inner desire to be authentic and true. And the questioner then says, where does this desire come from, and how can this desire genuinely be satisfied?
Yes, I suppose, I might question that a little bit and to say that I think, yes, there is a desire for authenticity. Certainly in our cultural moment there is. I think there is also a desire for falsehood. And sometimes that's an escapism. It's a numbing of the pain. It's like that's why I think the people who had built their life around you go to work and you live to play at the weekend and you try and distract yourself from that, and they can't go to the pubs or clubs anymore. I mean, maybe they're satisfying that now by binge watching box sets or, overeating or whatever, but these are all escapism, and they're all about kind of, so there's I would argue actually, yes, there is a desire for authenticity. On the other hand, sometimes we're quite happy with deception because it's easier. So we're quite happy to live in the dark, even though we might bump into things occasionally because we don't want to face up to the hard parts of the truth. And to illustrate that, that it's sometimes more convenient. I mentioned cancer earlier. I mean, if it may be more convenient not to know that you have it, but it's only by knowing that you have it that you can go through the tough process of treatment that may save your life. And so I think there is something in us that is quite happy to be deceived as well, and maybe even to deceive ourselves with the idea of authenticity, to think this is the real me and I can discover it. But at the same time, yes, I think there is a desire for more, for meaning, for purpose. I think I mentioned the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible earlier, this idea of under the sun, and there's a little phrase in it that says that God has written eternity on our hearts. And I think that's what we're feeling when we find that longing. It's a longing that has a goal. It finds satisfaction only in what is above the sun, beyond it, in the one who made the sun and who made us, that is beyond this world that we see and feel, that leads us to our true selves. And so I'm going to say that the answer, why do we have it, is because God put it there. And that's a good thing because it can lead us to him. But where do we find the answer? Well, it's only by coming to him.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul, for not just tonight, also last week. It's been a really enlightening couple of evenings, and hopefully everyone listening has found that as well. As I mentioned, if you want to continue to think these things through, we just really encourage you to get in touch with us, and particularly consider that Christianity Explored course. I can assure you it'll be really worth your while. That's it from us.
Thanks.
It's been a real pleasure having these conversations with you, Paul, and we do hope that you'll join us in person before too long. So thank you for listening. Thank you for coming along, and God bless.
Bye, folks.